Everyone to Flyover Footy. Our special guest today is Manuel Veth. Thank you so much for joining me again, Manuel. How are you, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Phil? Everything good in St. Louis?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Yes, there was a loss, but like your article that we're going to really hit hard today really gave me a boost. Not like to see that, we're going to talk about it, so we might as well jump into it. That all these values have gone up like crazy for St. Louis players. I said to you, I could kiss Lutz. I'm so happy. Like, it's so cool to see like performance and good smart signings turn into money. I mean, we made money already. That's pretty awesome.
You did, I guess.
In theory.
In theory. I mean, we have to. Our market values usually do meet the test of time. They're not always 100% correct. We all know how it works, and you can lose players on free transfers and all that sort of stuff. But this was a good update for St. Louis. This is usually the first update that we do, and I really want to stress this. This is a small update, as small as you can have an update in Major League Soccer, because we have 29 teams, right? Soon to be 30, I guess. And so even in a small update, you still end up with over 100 players that you're doing, because you always have at least one or two from every club. And I had to explain this over and over again to agents and club officials in the last week or so, that look, we didn't update any players of your club, not because we don't think they're good. It's because we usually don't do a big update for this one, because we're still in the middle of the transfer window. The season is still early. So really what we're doing, we're going in, and everyone who's been drafted, everyone who's new to the league, they get an adjustment. So this is an adjustment update. We call this an intermediary update, right? Having said all that, you still managed to update 14 St. Louis players, because and I think this is the most that since I've been in Transfermarkt we've done for an expansion team, and it's simply because they have outperformed all the expectations. I mean, my expectations were pretty good coming into this season. They weren't. I think no one, even the biggest optimist, thought that they would win 5 in a row right away, right? So of course we had to make quite a lot of adjustments, and then Kyle Hibbert gets called up to the Canadian national team, and so you have to right away put him into a sort of category that fits the players around him that are also getting called up to the national team, right? St. Louis saw the most adjustments of this update, which is still a small update. And look, when we do the big update in the summer, where we update something like 500-600 players, that's when you see real movement.
Yeah, that looks. I imagine, no one knows better than you how many players are in MLS than the guy who puts in all the data entry for it.
Over 800.
I can't imagine. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the changes in the salary, or the difference in their market value. I've got it pulled up here. Transfermarkt makes it easy. I mean, you just go click on initial value of a club, and it shows you everyone and how much they've changed. So I've got that in front of me, all the way from Akil Watts at the bottom to Miguel Perez at the top in market value changed. Anyone you want to start off with?
I mean, Kyle Hibbert is one, right? He receives his initial market value of 1.5 million.
From no market value previously.
From no market value, right? Because he was with the MLS Next Pro team, and MLS Next Pro players don't get market values, because not yet, anyways, because we're still kind of evaluating that league and what it actually is. But so he is now a full-fledged MLS player, a key MLS player for his club, and a fully fledged international after being called up by John Herdman to the Canadian national team, making his debut right against Honduras. And then so you look around the players, the center back players that Canada has around him, the Joel Watermans, like Lucas McNaughton, all these players that are sort of working their way into the squad, and they all have a similar market value. So it was quite easy for us to establish that. Remember, we don't evaluate by names, but we're evaluating by what a player in that position, of that age, in that category, in that league usually would cost, right? Think of it without a name. I had someone ask on Twitter how the whole evaluation process works. head to Transfermarkt, click on the news, scroll to the bottom. There's a short explainer. That's not enough. Click on the link. There's a whole site.
That's good to know. Yeah.
But so yeah, he's one that stood out to me. Miggy Perez, starting market value 2 million euros. Again, this is a huge talent. Walked into the squad. Is only 17. Is one of the most valuable central midfielders in the world now at his age category.
Oh my god.
And that's simply based on what we know a player like that could fetch on an open market, if St. Louis would opt to sell him to Europe, for example, right? So we know that he would at least they would make the club at least 2 million euros, possibly more. So those are like a couple names that stood out. Joao Klaus and Eduard Löwen. We had to make a little bit of an exception here because their transfer fees were actually lower than the market value upgrade suggested, but then you have such good performances, so we had to go up even a little bit. Usually we would have done this in the summer, but we have to kind of raise the floor a little bit with St. Louis in general. So these were the two ones to upgrade. And then with Isak Jensen, you look at him, he hasn't really had a huge impact yet, but we know that clubs like Bayern Munich, for example, were interested in him, so we know there's a strong market. So these are just a couple of names that pop straight out of the page for me, where we said, okay, well, we have to do something here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you started with those four. I know they're the easiest on the list to read first, but it's interesting to think that Miguel Perez and Kyle Hiebert, in a way, St. Louis is, if you look at it in a what you bought them for versus what they're worth now, they're worth more in cash, in profit. That's more profit in those two than guys like Löwen and Klaus. It's kind of weird to think about. And Hiebert the most, he was on a free. We haven't even put academy dollars into Hiebert. We just picked him up from a college on a free, and here we are. He's playing for the Canadian national team. But that's really wild to think that those two could kind of fetch more cash if they were to sell today than Löwen and Klaus.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense, right? Because when you think about it, like Eduard Löwen, let's take him for example, right? It would probably take another season or two in MLS on this level for him to really reestablish himself in this sort of market that he was in when he was in his prime in Germany, right? And really struggled with a few things. And Joao Klaus too. I mean, maybe in 3 or 4 years, a club from South America, Mexico, or Europe comes in and says, hey, we'll give you 8-9 million euros for him. But I feel like we need a bigger sample size of the player to really see that happening. Look, if he keeps scoring from here till August, the market value will continue to rise. And the same can be said about Eduard Löwen, right? If he keeps playing the way he is, the market value will continue to rise. But usually in this update, we don't even consider updating players like this, right? We focus more on like the Hieberts and the Pereses of this world, which is like, for example, why Gioacchini we didn't update, right? Because we want to see a little bit more of him. But he's a candidate. If he keeps playing the way he has, look, in August, we might give him a significant bump, right?
Yeah. And you just mentioned Gioacchini, and people did notice that his value did go down. And we figured this out off air, but maybe you can explain what happened there. It wasn't under St. Louis, right?
No, so no St. Louis player got downgraded. There was downgrades in this update. Lorenzo Insigne from Toronto FC is the most prominent one. Very simple explanation. He's getting older, and he hasn't really played up to his contract. And you look at around other players in his age category outside of MLS, like Marco Reus, for example, right? Who still plays in the Bundesliga, is at 12 million euros. Why should Lorenzo Insigne be more? Like that would be ridiculous, right? So that's why we have to go down. When players get older, we have to go down. It doesn't matter. This is, I think, something that I want to really hammer home right off the top. A market value doesn't mean a player is good or bad, right? I mean, you can have a fantastically well-running car that is 15 years old, but you're not going to get the money that you paid for it initially. It's just, that's not how it works. We all know how that there is a expiry date on every career eventually, right? I mean, if you're in your 30s, you're closer to that expiry date than when you're in your 20s. statistically speaking, unless like that's just how it is. And we have players like I had New York City FC fans go after me all year last year why Maxi Morales is only worth a few €100,000. And I'm like, well, because he's almost 40. It's just he's fantastic. He's a great player and he produces, but like you're not getting anything for him. When he leaves, he's going to leave for free. And guess what happens? He left on a free. So, like this is like something that I really want to hammer home here. And Giorgini, he did not go down in his market value. He did lose in market value when he was still with Orlando City. And Orlando City, of course, got him on a free from France where he was playing, and then he didn't really quite perform here. We have to remember he made a huge step in his development in the first few weeks, and if he's that sustainable, then you know what, his market value is also going to go back up.
Yeah, I would say another grouping of players that kind of are in a similar situation. We can talk about Ostrak, Stroud, Blom, and Vasilev, I think, are all getting a similar amount of playing time and showing good enough results to go up in value, which is cool.
Yeah. And Vasilev is really highly rated by people working for the club, right? Ostrak, I think we still all want to see a bit more of him. And same can be said about Blom. With Blom, we went up a little bit because we know the situation with him was interesting, right? Because the South African club, they essentially had an option to either lose him to another South African club, which would have caused mayhem for them, or give him to St. Louis. So they opted to give him to St. Louis.
Thank goodness.
And so the fee was lower than his market value. And we know that if he had gone on the open market and there would have been a fair competition for the player, then there would have been a higher fee that would have had to be paid. So we kind of wanted to reflect that. Although he is someone I kind of am keeping an eye on because I think we all expect a little bit more of him still.
Yeah, agree. Completely agree with that. I think he's definitely looks like one who's going to grow into the league. I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case, but I think he will. Even though offensively he's better than I expected. But here we are. The next grouping, I put all these three together. Celio Pompeu, Josh Yarrow, Akil Watts, all guys that came up from the 2 team. But yet, it's not too surprising that their price went up on one side, but on the other hand, they haven't gotten a ton of minutes. So this is, very it's awesome for me to see as a fan here for those three.
I think in those cases, they also didn't have a market value. So we essentially gave them a starting market value. If you play in MLS, you're supposed to have a starting market value. Schneider, for example, we did not give him market value because he's technically right now with the MLS Next Pro team. I know we have listed him in the first team, but I think he's technically with the MLS Next Pro team. So until he's starting to play in the MLS, he didn't get a market value. But all these other guys are with the MLS team, right? And so this is a starting market value. Pompeo, for example, we have seen quite a lot of, right? And there is a real sense that there is a market for him. So, this is like a grouping of players where we have to give them a market value. You can probably throw Caden Glover into this category as well.
Thanks.
Right? Because I think we would have seen him already in the MLS team with minutes if he hadn't had picked up that injury to start the season in preseason. So, and we know that there is significant interest in him from Europe. And with that in mind, we wanted to reflect that he is a really talented player who has been, part of the U.S. men's national team development program already. So, he's getting a really good starting market value at only 16, right? Because there is a sense that there's a really, really strong market for him.
Interesting. That's something I'll be watching your Twitter very closely for. Perhaps you get to announce when something happens there. And European interest is that's the ultimate thing for an MLS fan these days. For the ones that really care about the league developing, that's become a massive part of becoming a world-class club, which feels like we kind of entered immediately into when we started picking up guys like Berkey and Leuven. And these values are showing that has already paid off in 5 games. That's the biggest shocker to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, It's really difficult, right? Because I think they're still only third from bottom in squad value when you look
Mm.
at the MLS. But like now they've entered the club has entered a territory where there's a bunch of teams close enough around it, right? And then we'll have to see what happens in the big update in August, when you see a real reshuffling of the deck, and real downgrades and upgrades, and where every player essentially, even the players that do not get a new market value still will have been adjusted, because we will talk about every single player at every single club. This is a process that takes a long time, and involves many people. So, this is a big project in August. But that's when you see the real movements, right? Because then we have a full picture of the league. We have played several games. We've seen we have seen transfers. The transfer market is in full swing as well. So you get a really good sense of what the market is like. And so I would really keep an eye out for August. This has been special circumstances for St. Louis because they put us in a really tough spot. We spent several days arguing as a group at Transfermarkt. What are we going to do with St. Louis? And we actually came to the conclusion that we'll have to do something similar that we did with Union Berlin in the Bundesliga, right?
Yeah.
There's a club that with a pretty low squad value, and they're still sitting in third place in the Bundesliga, right? And are still within a shout of maybe even going first. So we couldn't really do much with them either. So that was actually kind of where we ended up landing. Is like, okay, we'll have to do something similar than we did with Union Berlin. We take a bunch of players and then adjust them, and maybe do more than we would usually do, just so we can raise the level a little bit. Every once in a while you get an outlier like that. So the closest comparison then, if you look at St. Louis to something that's happening maybe in another market, would be Union Berlin.
That is such a cool comparison, one that I hadn't considered at all. But it's true,
Yeah.
and that's what I was getting at. You mentioned that these values are going to go up. I was starting to wonder. I was like, boy, can we keep climbing? But I've totally forgotten that we were the lowest market value in MLS, if I'm not mistaken, before the season
but quite
started.
a lot. It was 20 million euros, and now it's 29 million. So if you want to adjust, we gave up on US dollars because the currencies fluctuate too much, and it's a real pain to adjust that on the side. But nowadays the euro and dollar is so close, you just essentially add 10% and you get your US dollar value, right? It's really quite straightforward. But so I think it was 20 million before the update, and now it's 29, if I'm not mistaken. So that's quite let me double check that figure before I say something stupid. Yeah, it's 29.2, and it was around 20. So a 9 million euro upgrade, which is a huge bump.
Yeah. And like you said, that's really cool to know that it's third from bottom now. So there's still if we hold this quality, or even if we only drop a little bit in quality as far as standings in the league, there's still so much more room to grow.
Well, there is, and you just look at where you are. So you're third from bottom, but when you look around you, Houston is just on top of that. So St. Louis is at 29.2, right, and then Houston is at 29.6, and then just below that is Montreal with 29.1, and bottom is now RSL, Real Salt Lake, who somehow managed to have a squad value of 27.03 million. While having 33 players under contract. Congrats, that's a good achievement right there.
I was confused by their salary number based on how they performed, honestly.
Yeah, so that's where you're at. But then you have Miami just ahead, right? Who have an extra player on the squad with 32.05 million euros in market value, or squad value in this case. And even if you go up 3 or 4 million, then you're already middle of the pack. And in MLS, the margins are quite small, right? Because everyone operates under the salary cap. And so the players that you can sign and the value that you can generate in terms of transfer fees, it can be really tricky. And then you have teams at the very top, like Atlanta, who are sitting at 60 million, but you have to remember 20 million of that in market value is just one player in Thiago Almada, right? So you can add a single superstar in MLS, and all of a sudden your squad value goes up significantly, right? because you have these designated player spots, but the rest of the squad is essentially all the same for every team. So the market values are quite close, and it reflects in many ways the salary cap situation, right? Market values is not what the player earns, it's what the player could fetch if the club chooses to sell them. But at the same time, like that's why MLS is also so fascinating as a league, because the playing field is really even. So from top to bottom, the team with the highest market value is Atlanta. The team with the lowest is RSL, and there's only quote unquote 33 million in between those two clubs, which sounds like a lot. You go to Europe, you go to the Bundesliga, for example, and there might be something like 800 million euros in difference between top to bottom, right? Wow. And so that's why the league is so competitive in terms of the results that you're getting, because everyone is essentially playing under the same rules. Yes, some of the bigger clubs, Atlanta, LAFC, they can attract 2 or 3 players that they're willing to spend a lot of money on, and that add a ton of market value to the squad, which is why they're so much ahead of it. But in the end of the day, if you take that one player out, all of a sudden the gap is nothing.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about as far as market values of players and them going up? Anything like that before we've got another topic we got to touch on here?
Yeah, I think we do have another topic. No, I think it's just like, I think it's really important to note. I think this is one thing that I always try to hammer home, because I think a lot of Europeans understand what market value is, right? This is not salary. The salary that players earn goes into our evaluation. Again, if you're confused about how it works, go to Transfermarkt, click on the any market value update. Any market value update we do, like for example, yesterday we published Argentina in English. Scroll to the bottom. There's a short explainer, 2 paragraphs. There's a link, and then if you find an entire page, and in fact, if you really wanted to, you can actually get involved in the discussion. Remember, the community at Transfermarkt drives the market value discussions, and before it comes to people like me, there's a bunch of people that already looked at it and have a vote. So anyone can get involved at Transfermarkt. There is a community, and you can sign up and you can become part of the discussion of this, right? That's how we get to the result at the end of the day. So yeah, just a shout out maybe to that. If you really want to get involved, and if you still can't find it, find me on Twitter. I'll direct you to the page.
No, but I'll post that. I didn't realize that I could have a hand in creating these values.
Yeah, anyone can sign up. Transfermarkt is a community. I mean, obviously, we have 2 million people signed up, I think, in the forums. Most of them are in Europe, and a vast majority of them in Germany. But yeah, it exists in any language, and we are quite open and welcoming North Americans to the site to get involved. So if you don't like our market values, go on the site and change it.
Love it. Well
it's
said.
a democratic process.
Well, another player, speaking of values skyrocketing, one of our own in some ways, Simon Becher of SLU, alum, St. Louis University soccer player, is doing some special things in Vancouver, which is where you currently live. And
close.
Close, yeah. Vancouver Island is different than Vancouver. But you know all about Simon, and you've got some things that you can kind of fill us in on his meteoric rise, very fast rise, that is really shocking a lot of people around the world.
He's been a fantastic player to watch in recent weeks, and he's a bad player that has also been very fortunate in terms of other players getting injured. You don't like to see it, right? Cordova going down with an injury, and he's Vancouver Whitecaps designated player, came in for quite a lot of money from Augsburg. Of course, was fantastic last year with RSL, right? So I think the Whitecaps did quite well signing this player, even though he's going to miss a few weeks now. But Simon Becher stepped up. Didn't play yesterday in the Champions League. I was actually in Vancouver. Took a Harbour Air flight, seaplane. That's how we get around here, because I do live on an island. It's not a small island. I think we talked about this last week. It's about the size of England, but Canada is a big place, Phil. We think that's a very well-established fact. But Simon Becher has been a really fun player. And I think, I tweeted this last week when when he played against Montreal, when he finally got a start against Montreal, and the week before when he scored a late equalizer against Minnesota, I tweeted this and saying he finally gets a start. He's finally gets a start, and he finally gets playing time. Didn't start yesterday in the Champions League where they got smashed against LAFC. But I was told after the game by Vanni Sartini, the head coach, that that's because he's planning to start him against Portland Timbers, which is a more important game. Anyone who knows a little bit about the Cascadia, the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, knows that there's quite a strong rivalry between Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, right? So this is a game that really matters for the Vancouver fans a lot more than a Champions League game against LAFC. As sad as that is, that's just the reality that we live in. But yeah, Simon Becher broke a record. I'm trying to find it here. That's why I keep looking away. He was the man of the match day. And I think he's the first player to score 5 goals in 87 minutes. Is that the record?
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, his goal scoring record has been insane. I tweeted it. I feel like an idiot that I didn't have this ready. Here it is.
School scoring record.
No, I got it. Here.
Okay.
He's the fastest player in MLS history to score his first 4 MLS goals, doing so in just 87 minutes of game action.
That's amazing.
Incredible, eh?
I liked hearing that you said he finally starts for the senior team. So you saw his quality down in MLS Pro, Next Pro.
I think a lot of people have. This is my exclusive news for your podcast, for your show. A lot of people have around the league, and I know that St. Louis tried to get him in the offseason, and I spoke to sources yesterday at the game who confirmed this to me, that there was an offer. Ultimately, what happened is that Nicolas Giorgini became available at the draft, and I don't want to. Hindsight is 2020, and Nicolas Giorgini was such a fantastic pickup. The moment he became available, St. Louis shifted and got him, while keeping an eye on Becher and probably hoping that he wouldn't explode onto the scene, because there was continuous talks and there have been conversations about bringing him on, but he's gotten very expensive now. And the thing is, too, the Whitecaps, I mean, he got a market value upgrade as well. And he's probably going to get another big bump in the summer. And the thing with him is he's on a very affordable contract. So anyone can fit him in, right? Which then, of course, if you are a club interested now, Vancouver will just rub their hands and say, okay, well, you want to get Simon Becher, make us an offer we cannot refuse. And if he keeps scoring like that, they can sell him to Europe, right? But yes, 100% St. Louis were interested to bring him in the summer.
Yeah, I think my first thought was, and this is even me who watched him play with SLU, saw his very obvious his quality, and I was curious how he would adapt. It's looking like clearly he's in less than a year he's figuring it out, even on the MLS level, which is extremely fast. But I would say if you are a doubter, I do remember Ayo Akinola scoring, that hat trick early. Was it last season or the season before? And boy, he was just on fire. And then it went cold. I think he got injured too, perhaps.
Yeah, he tore his ACL. So I know Ayo quite well. Okay. And I've done a couple interviews with him for Transfermarkt, and I know his background a little bit, and he tore his ACL. And he is a player who is a very strong player, right? You look at his physicality; he does need to be fit to have that sort of mobility. He comes across as maybe too heavy sometimes. He's not. I mean, this guy is 100% muscle, right? He's a very, very, very strong player. But if you are not 100% fit and coming back from ACL injury, I've suffered this injury myself. I know how brutal it can be and how difficult it can be to come back from that, especially when you are a bigger, heavier guy, right? And again, I don't want to say he's fat. He's not. Like, anyone who's seen him in real life can quickly identify that. But muscle mass is also heavy, and you need to have that explosiveness. You need to be 100% fit, and it takes time after an injury like that. So, That's like my little back. Ayo Akinola has a strong market in MLS. You know, Vancouver was all over him, and they talked to when his contract ran up with Toronto. He wasn't a fully free agent, right? He was restricted. They still had to get a trade in place to get him, but Vancouver talked to Ayo Akinola's team to get him. And if Toronto had played ball, he'd be a Whitecap now.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, we're getting sidetracked here because this
We
has
are.
nothing
I
to
guess
do with
that's
Simon
the
Becher.
question. Is it sounds like both Ayo and Simon Becher, you think that's sustainable? That's a sustainable amount of talent in MLS, without the injury.
I think it's so different, right? Simon is not that physical of a player. He is a physical player in terms of how he plays. He's defensively quite strong, and that's something I think that they really like in Vancouver about him. His work rate is unbelievable. Yes. Just look at the goals that he scored against Montreal. I think in one of the goals, he literally wrestles a defender to the ground before he actually tucks it away.
So good.
It's so good, and like that is something that you really need in this league to succeed. You need to be very physical and you need to be strong. And there's a lot of big guys in this league, right? And he does this really well. He reads the game really well. His situational awareness is fantastic. So, they're not really comparable in that sense. What I think I really like about him too is when he is on with Brian White, the two really, they seem to really click well together. Brian is another player who works really hard, and Brian is one of the nicest people you'll meet. And so to have the two kind of play together, I think they get a lot out of each other. So, yeah. I mean, we know now that the team in Vancouver, the coaching staff is really high on him too. I've Vani Satini on record saying that Simon Becher is going to start and play 90 minutes against Portland. So there you got it.
Love it. Yeah, and that's not surprising to hear that he's really good with White. SLU wouldn't always play with two strikers, but when they did, it was really fun to watch in that same way. There's like two unrelenting strikers just grinding down the center backs throughout the game. And it's no surprise that a lot of, clearly because he's subbing on, but Becher's goals coming late isn't at all surprising.
You know what is great about this? I mean, I don't know if you followed this at all, Phil, but there's a lot of people complaining on Twitter about MLS not having stories.
Oh, no, I haven't seen that.
What are you doing? I mean,
that's funny.
This is such a great story.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working on a story right now on Dennis Bouanga at LAFC and the way he's replacing Cristiano Arango's goals. There's another great story. I mean, this league is full of great stories. If you don't see great stories in MLS, you're not looking hard enough. And this Simon Becher story is such a great one as well. We have another young kid in Vancouver, Ali Ahmed, right, who made his debut in the Montreal starting 11 debut, I have to stress here, against Montreal, right? And they had to interrupt the game briefly so he could break his fasting, right? Because he's a Muslim. And like, give me a break. Like these are great stories. And if you think there is no great stories in MLS, you're not looking hard enough.
Yeah, I noticed John Bell said something during that Muslim holiday. I'm going to get it wrong. But
Ramadan,
thank you. Yeah, I mean, that would actually be a really cool story to talk to a bunch of Muslims in MLS. Since
we've got lots. I mean, like, it's not my story to tell, but
sure.
Maybe next year that's something that I should focus on. But like, I can't believe no one has told that story yet.
Yeah.
So it's like, but like, there is tons of stories like that. And if you think MLS doesn't have any stories, then you're not looking hard enough. And like the Simon Becher one is a great story. We'll have to see how it goes, right? But that is a fantastic story to follow at the moment, I think.
Agree. And, just to wrap it up, I mean, I'm not, again, to come back to St. Louis, having interest in Simon, your description of him was dead on from what I've seen, and I was a massive fan of him at SLU. It's no surprise that St. Louis wanted him. He would have fit in perfectly in St. Louis. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I think his work rate, the ability, the way he plays, the way he conducts himself, right? I think these are all qualities that Bradley Cannell and Lutz Pfannenstiel and everyone involved in the club is looking for, which is why they talked to Axel Schuster and Nick Overhaul was still in charge, still with the sporting team in Vancouver at the time. But yeah, it didn't go anywhere. They made a different decision. And look, Nico Giorgini is a great pickup. I think they were quite surprised that player fell into their laps. And when you get that opportunity, you have to go for it. It's also really interesting to see, like, that's what people in Vancouver were not fully involved in St. Louis also said to me, like, they realized the moment Giorgini became available, that would kill that talk right away. And I think they're not too sad about it.
I imagine not, especially now. And same for Simon. Look how much playing time he's getting and has earned. So that's really cool to see.
Absolutely.
All right. Manuel, thank you so much. Manuel is the North American manager of Transfermarkt. Thanks for filling us in, giving us a little bit of a breaking story here. You're the best, man. Thank you.
No, thanks so much for having me, and keep up the good work. And yeah, can't wait for MLS match day. I guess match day 7 already. It's coming fast at you. So
yeah, big couple of weeks for St. Louis. So
Sounders, right?
Yep.
Just around the corner from where I live. I can see Seattle at night. I can see the lights of Seattle at night when I look across the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So yeah. Good luck in Seattle.
Yeah, thanks, man. We'll be chatting to you soon.
Yeah. Until next one.
Bye.
Cheers.
Okay.